Disclaimer. Any references to historical events, people, or locations are used fictitiously, and any resemblance to actual events, locations, or persons, living or dead, Thoradin or otherwise, are entirely coincidental.
So.
So.
So, here we go.
A long time ago, the unlikely friends Tryn and Mithrali were travelling the land in search of fame, fortune, and enlightenment. This particular night, the pair found themselves in a seedy-looking establishment called the Drunken Dagger, where Mithrali had been able to negotiate some sweet discounts in exchange for an evening's entertainment of epic poetry. The pub patrons were not remotely interested in Mithrali's classically trained repertoire, but eventually a rousing rendition of Borodin the Orphan Maker seemed to provoke a response. Boo! One of the drunkest patrons, who sported a bright red beard, started heckling Mithrali. I hate this one! Your poems suck! Tryn, watching from a nearby table, was outraged. No one insulted her friends, but she was only 3'6", and this huge bearded oaf was nearly twice her height. She'd have to think of something smart. Redbeard was now on his feet, slurring his words. I heard that Borodin was a goddamn hero. Your poem is full of lies! He didn't get to protest any further, because Tryn, having snuck her way around the pub until she was directly behind him, seized the opportunity to smack him a stinging blow across the highest point she could reach, his arse. Before he could turn, Tryn turned herself into a small spider that scuttled away across the floorboards. Drunk and confused, the Redbeard spun and roared in the face of the patron behind him, who, similarly intoxicated, responded in kind. In seconds, the whole pub was in an uproar. Insults, punches, tankards were all being thrown, chairs were broken, the innkeeper was yelling. Mithrali continued her poem. The fight was giving a lovely ambiance. Amidst the carnage, Redbeard was socked in the jaw and staggered backwards, and the sole of his boot landed on tiny spider Tryn. In a fraction of a second, the spell was broken, and Tryn rematerialised on the pub floor, half trodden on by a very surprised-looking Redbeard. For a second, there was silence in the pub, and then suddenly, he's kicked a child! What a monster! Get him out! 10 minutes later, Tryn and Mithrali were enjoying a delicious meal on the house, served to them by a mortified innkeep, who had waived any fees for their night's accommodation. Tryn's dinner was off the kids' menu, but she decided to keep quiet about it. The night seemed to have been, weirdly, a success. Wonder where they would end up tomorrow.
Tryn and Mithrali are out adventuring, looking for fame, fortune, and some sense of enlightenment. And because it was a pretty dreary day, they didn't have much of an opportunity to find somewhere good to stay, so they ended up in a bit of a hovel called the Drunken Dagger. Mithrali had a really good idea. She said, okay, I think I can get us a bit of a discount here if maybe I can read a few poems, cheer up the locals. And she had a chat with the innkeep and set about and went to tell a few tales. It would be fairly safe to say that the patrons were not interested in anything she had to say. In fact, while she was orating her fantastic recount of Borodin the Orphan Maker, this really seemed to upset some people. In fact, there was a huge red-beard ogre on one table, who definitely was the drunkest person in the place. Stood up and started yelling at her, going, oh, I hate this story, I hate you, I hate your poems, you all suck. And although this didn't faze Mithrali in the slightest, and she carried on reading, definitely Tryn took aversion. People don't insult her friends, she thought, but as she was only about 3 foot tall, and this red-headed ogre was definitely at least twice her size, she was going to have to think a bit harder about how she's going to do this. So, while Miss Riley kept on reading, she scuttled around the back of the tavern and crept up behind this ogre and gave him a stinging blow on the only place that she could probably reach him, his arse, and quickly, like flash, turned into a spider and scuttled away. Being smacked on the bum, the red-headed ogre let out this massive roar and flipped around and yelled in the face of the closest other drunkard behind him, who yelled at him in kind, and within seconds all hell broke loose. Tankards were being thrown across the rooms, chairs were being smashed, pretty sure a chicken flew past at some point, and all was getting pretty entertaining until Redbeard got clapped in the face good and proper and hit the floor. But as his boot came flying down, Mithrali's 8 tiny little eyes— oh, it's not Mithrali, sorry, this is Tryn who's the spider. Tryn's 8 little eyes looked up to see a boot descending upon her head, and when it clapped down and almost squished her entirely, it broke her spell, and she popped up back on the floor, much to the surprise of the ogre who'd almost just squished her. There was a moment's silence, and it was broken by somebody on the other side of the room going, "Hey! Hey! That guy just kicked a child! Yeah!" And suddenly the entire chorus of everyone else in the pub broke out, started yelling at Redbeard, who was promptly picked up by his haunches and thrown clean out of the bar. So the evening kind of quietened down a little bit, and the innkeeper, who was absolutely beside himself, decided that maybe he should treat Mithrali and Tryn to free lodgings and free food, which was very nice, although Tryn was a little upset by the fact that she got the kids' portion, but that seemed okay. And so what had started off as being a bit of a sketchy evening actually turned out to be pretty good in the end. Question is, where would they end up tomorrow?
Once upon a time, Tryn and Mithrali were out and about, contemplating their next adventure, and after a long day of travelling, they decided they needed to stop up, and in the town that they were in, went to the inn called the Drunken Dagger. Now, having been travelling for a little while and being a little bit short on funds, Mithrali came up with the brilliant idea that she would try and reduce the costs for them by entertaining the locals. She thought, maybe I can tell some stories, recount some poems, and go from there. So Tryn thought, yeah, fine, this sounds like a plan. So Mithrali went off to the barkeep, had a little discussion, and a deal was struck. So Mithrali began to recount tales and poems, and it was a relatively flat reception from everyone within the inn until she started to recount the story of Borodin, the orphan killer or orphan maker. It's a highly fictionalized story, and it was at this point that something erupted in the back of the inn. A big red-haired ogre was getting a bit agitated and started to shout obscenities. "You're shit, that story's shit." Now Tryn, being the good-hearted friend that she is, took offence to this. She was not happy that her friend was being insulted. Mithrali, being the professional that she is, carried on nonetheless. Now Tryn thought, no, I've had enough of this, but being only 3 foot tall, and this creature being 2-3 times her size, that caused a bit of a problem. So using her little legs, she managed to get around the outside of the inn, round the back of the big red-haired, drunken, stinking ogre, and managed to hit him in the only place she knew she could reach, his ass. Quick as a flash, the quarterstaff hit him in the haunches, and boom, she transformed herself into a tiny little spider. The ogre jumped at this sudden attack from behind and started to yell and scream, and seeing no one there other than another red-faced drunkard, accused him of this attack. It was not very long before tables were flipped, chairs were smashed, tankards flew, and a brawl of epic proportions broke out. All the while, Mithrali is in the corner, continuing to weave her tales. But this brawl starts to get out of hand, and one of the patrons manages to clock the ogre, somehow managing to knock him off his feet, and in so doing he managed to kick off one of his boots. Now this boot came flying through the air, and the last thing these 8 tiny eyes of Tryn saw was the sole of this boot come crashing down on her head. Now, being only a tiny spider, this managed to knock her clean out of her wild shape and back into the form of a halfling. The ogre on the floor, red-faced, his beard bristling, realised that this person wasn't there before, and now is sat there next to him with a boot on her head, and you were the one that did this to me, and proceeded to raise a fist to Tryn. From across the bar there was like, "Oi! That ogre's just gonna hit a child!" Now everyone in the inn is apparently a drunkard, but a gentleman, and seeing that this ogre was about to hit a poor defenseless child, managed to grab him by the scruff of the neck and chucked him out of the inn. Very embarrassed about the whole situation that had befallen Tryn and Mithrali's treatment of her, kind offer of entertainment, the innkeeper made an offer that they would be able to lodge there for free that night and have a free meal, and hopefully the whole thing would be glossed over. So ended up being a bit of a sketchy place to begin with, but ended up being rather welcoming in the end, and Tryn and Mithrali managed to have a good night's rest. But that was only the end of that day. What other adventures would be in store for them the next?
Once upon a time, Tryn and Mithrali are out having some wonderful, lovely adventures, and they go through to various different towns, do cool things, and then continue on, and as they're contemplating all these adventures, they remember one time they were travelling, and they went to a town, and they decided, it's a bit late, we should probably stop here for the night. So they go and find an inn called the Drunken Dagger Inn, because apparently daggers can get drunk now. And as they get there, they realise that they're short on funds. So they have a think, and then Mithrali comes up with this great idea that she's gonna entertain everyone. She knows loads of poems and stories and stuff, which is just busk basically. She'll tell them what's going on. And so Tryn agrees, and Mithrali goes up to the barman, and they have a chat, and they strike a deal. So Mithrali gets up and starts recounting all these wonderful stories and poems that she knows, and the audience is it's a bit of a tough audience tonight, really. No one's really interested, it's a bit flat. Until she starts recounting the story of Borodin the Orphan Maker, which is a completely fictional story, and any resemblance to real people is entirely coincidental. As she starts telling the story, one of the orcs in the back, this big, burly ogre, not an orc, sorry, is big, he's burly, he's got red hair and a big bristly beard. He stands up and he starts yelling at obscenities at Mithrali, saying, "Your story's shit! How dare you say that about Borodin? How dare you?" And Mithrali, ever the professional, just completely ignores it and continues on with the story. She doesn't care. Someone's saying rude things. Who cares? Tryn, however, is a little bit upset at this, and she takes offence. So she decides she's going to do something about this. The inner problem, Tryn's a little bit small. This ogre is really big. Tryn's 3 foot or something, maybe 4, and this ogre's 8 or 9. He's a big boy. So she's gonna have to be a little bit sneaky. So what she does is she sneaks around the back, goes right to the back of the inn, stands behind the dude, and then, hitting basically the only thing she can really reach at her height, smacks him between the legs with her quarterstaff. And as she smacks with her quarterstaff, she immediately turns into a spider and disappears. Now, this ogre's very surprised and he jumps up and yells and screams and then accuses one of the other drunkards of hitting him in the arse. And they start, brawling, start flipping tables, chairs going everywhere, tankards getting smashed. It's a brawl of epic proportions, really. Mithrali, of course, is completely ignoring this brawl and just continuing to tell the completely fictional story of Borodin, the Orphan Maker. And the brawl starts to get a little bit out of hand. And at one point, one of the patrons actually smacks the thug right in the face. And he goes flying, and one of his boots actually comes flying off. And the boot comes flying off, and it spins through the air, and then it lands on little spider Tryn. And she doesn't have many hit points as a spider, so she immediately turns back into a halfling. Now this ogre, really red-faced, angry, bristling beard, he's not happy about this whole... He realises, despite just being smacked in the head and probably not really knowing what's going on, he realises that Tryn, she wasn't there before, and he points at her, and he raises her fist and says, "You weren't there before," and he goes to hit her. And across the bar, one of the patrons spots him and goes, "Oi! That ogre's gonna hit a child!" And the thing is, everyone here might be drunk. I mean, even their daggers are drunk, apparently. But they're, of course, they're all gentlemen. They don't want a kid getting hit. So they take this ogre and they throw him out of the bar, and he flies out down the street. Now, this has all, of course, been quite a bit of fuss, just for, a brawl, come on. And the barkeep's a little bit embarrassed at this whole thing. So he has a chat with Tryn and Mithrali and says, "Your treatment's not been that great. Why don't I give you guys free lodging and a free meal? I'll just gloss over the whole thing." And, it's a little bit of a sketchy end, but it's fine in the end. I mean, Tryn and Mithrali have a decent night's sleep, and they venture off into the morning to find what other adventures may be in store for them next time.
This is a work of fiction. Names, places, characters and events are purely figments of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real people, living or dead, real events, is purely coincidental. One day, Tryn and Mithrali were walking through a field. Now, unlike Tryn, they didn't get lost because they weren't shit at ranging. Nonetheless, after getting where they needed to go, they were very tired, and so they thought, let's stop off at a local tavern, get refreshed, maybe some lodging overnight. And what lay around the corner but the Drunken Dagger tavern, supposedly. So they go in, they go to the bar to order a few frosty beverages. As they're doing so, they realise, shit, I haven't got any money. So they decide, or Mithrali decides, ever the entrepreneur, to busk and earn their way for the night. So she pulls out her lute, finds a comfy spot in the corner and starts playing. The tavern's quite rowdy, it's getting heckled a lot, so she thinks, I know, I'm going to pull out a fan favourite. And she starts on the tale of Borodin, Orphan Maker. Now, this gets a better reaction from the crowd. Apart from one guy, there's an ogre in the corner near the fire who seems to take offence. And he's like, "How dare you throw such slander about the mighty Borodin?" Wonder who that could be. And then starts heckling her. Now, ever the consummate professional, Mithrali just cracks on, doesn't faze her. Tryn, on the other hand, has more delicate sensibilities, is really wound up by this. So she sneaks round the back of the tavern, Mithrali's still playing all the while, and she smacks this ogre in the nads with a quarterstaff. Ogre is very surprised, shrieks and turns around, but by this point, Tryn's turned into a spider and scuttled away. The ogre, confused as to why he was in pain, blames the guy standing behind him and smacks him in the face. And a big bar fight and brawl ensues. There's, mugs and goblets flying everywhere, cutlery, tables get turned over, etc., etc. And somewhere amidst the chaos, all the while Mithrali's still playing, the ogre's boot goes flying off and lands on a spider in the corner of the room. Now, being a spider, Tryn doesn't have many hit points at all, and so she is immediately knocked unconscious but turns back into her human form. The ogre, realising something was amiss, not as dumb as most ogres, decided, hang on, there's some sorcery at play, so decides to investigate. Walking up towards Tryn, it becomes increasingly obvious, seeing the quarterstaff at her side, that it was her that had hit him in the nads, and he bellows, and as he's approaching her, fists raised, someone else in the bar of wrong-uns, but is apparently still a decent person at heart, says, "Hey, that ogre's about to hit a child." And so they grab the ogre collectively and they throw him out of the bar. And the barkeep, terribly embarrassed by all of this, says, "Hey, look guys, the Drunken Dagger is an honourable establishment, and you've not had a great example of what it's like to be here. Let me give you free food and lodging for the night." So they enjoyed their food, they enjoyed their drinks, they had a nice sleep, and then the next day they went on their way. The end.
Okay, here we go. So we must start with a disclaimer. This is a work of fiction, purely from the author's imagination, so any characters, storylines, or that resemble anything in real life is pure coincidence. So, one day, Tryn and Mithrali decide to go for a wander. Unlike Tryn, they do not get lost. On this walk, they decide they would like a drink, so they venture to a local tavern to have some frosty beverages. They come across the Drunken Dagger, and they make their way in and they order these beverages. Or do they? Because they realise they do not have money. So, being the entrepreneur she is, Mithrali decides to do some busking. So she starts to perform. For the life of me, I do not know what instrument, but feel free to add one in. She starts playing. It's going okay, but they're not quite receptive, the audience, so she starts to play another one. This is called Borodin, the Orphan Maker. This one goes down a lot better, but whilst this is going on, there is a large gentleman, you could say an ogre, pipes up and does not sound too pleased, and he says, "How dare you slander the name of Borodin?" Oh, Borodin. and and starts to make a bit of a fuss about it. Mithrali, a bit more laid back, carries on playing, not phased too much by this. But Tryn, well, she's got a bit of a shorter fuse, and gets very annoyed by this, so she decides to sneak up on this ogre and give him a good whack with her quarterstaff right in where the sun don't shine. The ogre screams in pain, looking round to why his private parts are slightly in pain. But doesn't see anything because Tryn turned into a spider and disappeared. So, in the confusion and wondering who had the audacity to hit him in the nads, he looks round and notices a man nearby and starts accusing him of doing so. So, more ruckus follows, and during this kind of partial bar fight going on, the ogre's boot flies off. I think it was his boot, and shots across the bar while Mithrali is still playing away, and hits this spider. Now, we all know what happens when a very small creature gets hit by something large. It's especially if you're a druid, turn back into yourself. So, the ogre is quite smart actually for an ogre, and discovers that Tryn is carrying a quarterstaff as well, and realises that is the bitch that basically hit me in the nuts. So starts to rush up to her, fist out, but being a respectable establishment, there is a man that turns around and says, "Wait a minute, that ogre's about to hit a child." I'm assuming she's a very small druid. And so they chuck the ogre out. And the tavern owner comes over to Tryn and apologises for such behaviour, and offers free food and lodgings for the night to make up for their not so nice visit. And so they enjoy those lodgings and carry on their merry way the next day.
Tryn and Mithrali are going for a walk. They do not get lost like certain people named Tryn might do. So they're on their way, and while they're on their way to the place that they're going to, they happen across a tavern called the Drunken Dagger. They are pretty thirsty, so they decide to go inside and get to the bar, order, or think about ordering, but before they can do that, they realise that they have forgotten to pack any money. They haven't got any cash on them at all. So Mithrali decides to do a bit of busking. She whips out an instrument of some description, not sure what it is, but it's an instrument, and starts playing. She plays the first song, and it's not going down too well with the crowd, so she moves on to a second song called Borodin, the Orphan Maker. And this one's going down a lot better. It's got some interest from the crowd. They're getting into the story behind it, until one chap right at the back seems to take a bit of offence to it, and he gets up from his seat, and oh, it's an ogre. He's an ogre. He says, "Hey, I don't like how similar that name is to Thoradin. I think you're sullying his good name. How dare you?" And Mithrali is not too bothered by this. She's a professional. She keeps on playing. But Tryn, names are hard. Tryn, let's go with Tryn. Tryn is annoyed by this. She takes umbrage with the heckler and sneaks up behind him, quarterstaff in hand, ready to give him a whack in the balls from behind. So she does this very quickly, very stealthily, and quickly turns herself into a spider before this ogre whips his head around to see who's just whacked him in the nads. And he doesn't see anyone, obviously. You can see this little spider stealthing away, but who he does see is the chap that's stood behind him, just enjoying this song about Borodin. And in his ogre brain, he puts 1 and 1 together, and he makes 2. And he goes, the hurt came from behind me. This guy is behind me. Punch the guy! So he punches the guy. He turns it into a big fist fight. It's a big old bar brawl going on, and in all the commotion, someone's shoe flies off. The ogre's shoe flies off. Sure, let's go with that. His shoe flies off, and it hits a little spider, and this spider just so happens to be a small druid named Tryn, we think. And Tryn, as most druids do when they're hit by something, when they're in animal form, turns back into herself, and the ogre sees this little druid figure with a quarterstaff, and he puts that 1 and 1 together again. He goes, the hurt felt a bit like a quarterstaff. There's a quarterstaff in the hands of someone that was obviously trying to sneak away from me. Ha! And he runs up to Tryn, ready to punch her lights out. But before he can get to her, someone across the bar yells, "Hang on! Stop there! He's about to hit a child!" Tryn is a very small druid, apparently. So, being a fine establishment, not like okay with bar fights, but not okay with kids being involved in that, the manager puts an end to this immediately, chucks the ogre out, and apologises profusely to Tryn and Mithrali, to them, and offers them lodgings and drinks for the night by way of an apology, and in the hopes of a good review on TripAdvisor, I guess.
Tryn and Mithrali are together on an adventure. They're going somewhere. We don't know where they're going. But while they are travelling, they decide that they're getting pretty thirsty and they need a drink. As luck would have it, they round a corner and they see a pub called the Drunken Dagger. So, without much further ado, they go into the pub, and Tryn and Mithrali go up to the bar, and they start to order their drinks. As they're doing this, they suddenly realise they completely forgot to pack any money. But it's okay, because Mithrali is an enterprising sort and decides that she could probably busk this and it'll be alright. So she starts one song, and the crowd isn't really receiving it very well. They don't seem very interested. So she finishes that up and goes on to her next song, which is about Borodin and his orphan killing antics. So, sort of midway through this song, a chap at the back, actually an ogre, starts sort of getting a bit rowdy and saying, "Hey, I don't like this song, I don't like the sounds of this sounds like someone I know." And Mithrali's, she's not put off, she keeps singing the song. But Tryn is sort of a bit wary. This guy thinks he might be a bit of a disturbance. So she tries to sort of sneak up behind him. She's a druid, so she's got a quarterstaff, and she's very short, actually, very short druid. She sneaks up behind this guy and decides probably just gonna whack him in the nads. So she does that, and as the ogre is obviously in pain and spinning around, she turns into a spider to try and hide. So this ogre, obviously not seeing Tryn turn into a spider, very stealthy, sees the guy behind him, and he sort of looks and he thinks, well, I'm in pain, the guy behind me must have done it, I don't know how, because I don't see a stick, but it must be the guy behind me. So he starts sort of throwing punches. In the meantime, Tryn is still in spider form, sort of scuttling away. And this sort of small fist fight turns into a massive brawl, basically. Mithrali's probably still trying to sing over the din, and Tryn's still trying to, make sure no one sees her. Unfortunately, stuff starts getting thrown, and something hits Tryn, and she then unmorphs from being a spider, because she's actually a druid. And the ogre kind of sees this happen. And he realises, hey, that short-looking druid over there just came out of nowhere. Must have been, pretending to be some sort of animal, like a mouse or something. And actually works out that it was probably Tryn that did this, because he can see this quarterstaff and his balls don't feel great, and they feel like they might have been hit by the quarterstaff. So he says, hang on a second, and starts after Tryn. Is sort of, waving and trying to push through the crowd to get to her, to try and beat her up. Tryn's bricking it. And the bar staff actually notice this, and one of the bartenders just starts shouting, "Hey, no, you can't do this, you can't, you're trying to beat up a kid, what the heck do you think you're doing?" And they eject the ogre for, being annoying and trying to beat up a child. And the owner of the public house, the Drunken Dagger, tells Mithrali and Tryn it's all alright. Gives them free board and lodgings. Wow. Gives them some drink, some lodgings, whatever. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Bye.
Good luck, whoever's next.